So, you have the handout. And this is an exact reproduction of what's listed in the table of contents.
Yeah.
So, what we're trying to create by using the cereal boxes as a representation of the books is we're trying to drive home that idea that the Bible is a library and it has all kinds of different literature in it. So for example, the first book of the so-called law, sometimes referred to as the books of Moses, or the books where Moses is the main character. That's kind of the most important part of the Old Testament. The histories tell the narrative story. It's kind of interesting that 85% of the Bible is story, which is a lot. And we're going to work on those. And then next week we'll start on the poetry books and the prophets. And then after that we'll move into the New Testament. So Bible means library. In the Protestant list, there's 66 books. You may look, for example, if your Jewish friends show you their Bible and you look at it, it should look a lot like our so-called Old Testament, but you'll see some things are different. Like Samuel, we have 2 Samuels, and they have 1. We have 2 Kings, they have 1. We have Ezra and Nehemiah as 2 books, they have it as 1. So it makes sense if you ever see them in scrolls, but it doesn't make sense because you're so used to one or the other. So the idea here is hands-on, what does it look like? It's a specialized library.
Yeah. And what we're going to do is, Aiden, you're going to work on the law, the red, since you're sitting with the red paper. You two can work on the history ones with the brown. And while Pastor will be talking about other things, you guys are going to be going over, getting a cereal box, and we're going to create the books.
So
let me show them
everything I
that
ever
quick.
learned in life, I learned in kindergarten.
That's right.
Don't run with pointy scissors.
Do you know how you're supposed to hold scissors when you walk with them?
Hold the blades.
People are like, oh, here you go.
Misguided told me that.
So over here is the scissors, there's tape, there's rulers. Over here are your books, not the law. And I'll get you yours if they're not over there.
Get
They should
what?
be. Your
Oh.
book, your
Spine.
spines,
Spine.
these.
And then our spine has scoliosis.
Oh, right here. Okay, thanks. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna tape the front, the top of the cereal box closed. Okay, are you listening?
Yeah.
And I used the blue. I happened to use tape this closed. And then on both sides of this, you're gonna just use plain white paper.
Okay, do we
It's the spine only that will change the color.
change the color? Yes.
And what I did was I used the ruler and a regular cereal box, about a 4-inch strip.
That's
spine will
white
fit
paper
here.
that we need.
So make it 4 inches wide. You guys all can use a ruler. Make a 4-inch strip and just use tape and put the white on first. Put your spine on, and then the book of the Bible
She just handed them
can
over
be
to us.
glued on the spine. And the reason I thought maybe we could use the white is because they can write on these boxes if we have any notes or anything
I
specific
got one 'cause-
that might jump out,
Very clever.
as we're learning about.
Can we get more scissors?
So that's why I thought
Pair here
it should
and
have
pair
white
there.
on there,
I'm
so we
taking
can
two.
do that. So as Pastor is talking to you about
Different books.
different books of the Bible, you're going to be working on these at the moment. So listen as you're crafting, and Miss Tiffany, you can just
Crafty.
jump in wherever you need to jump in.
Are we allowed to just
Wait, do we
Yes.
need this?
take boxes
Or, like,
out?
can we cross out on it?
That's yours.
Cross out like in every book that we do?
So like, can we
Yeah,
get?
but that's yours to keep.
So can we get like
You
crayons
don't
so like
need to
when we're
cross it
done
off,
with the
just
one?
That's what she just asked.
Yeah.
Just use
Wait
this.
a minute.
These
No, she
big
said
cut
cross it out,
These
like-
are the ones.
She did. No.
Okay. I mean, if you want to write on that, you can. It's a little crazy when we're doing crafting
Yes,
and lesson.
being crafty.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna take 4 for now.
All right, so while you're working, I want to tell you a couple of things about the books as we go through them.
Yeah.
So the first one is Genesis. And a couple of cool things in Genesis.
I need more scissors.
There,
Yeah,
the first 11 chapters of Genesis are like an introduction to the book.
No, I want colored pencils to color on my.
No, they're not getting colored today. That's for another day.
So if you remember when you were a little kid, you heard stories about Adam and Eve and the flood and the Tower of Babel and that kind of stuff. That's all in those first 11 chapters of Genesis. And the actual important biblical narrative piece kind of begins with chapter 12. And chapter 12 starts the story of Abram, who later gets his name changed to Abraham.
But it's spelled
Abram, and then
Abram.
Abraham. And that starts at chapter 12, right after the Tower of Babel. And then chapter 12 begins with, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to a land that I will show you." And it starts the whole story of Abraham. He is the biological forefather of the people of Israel, and that story is detailed in the Bible. But Abraham, you know, we always sort of hone in on the way the biblical narrative works, and it talks about him having a problem getting his wife pregnant.
Oh.
God says to him, "I'm going to make you the father of a great nation, only they don't have any kids." And so Abraham keeps asking the question, it's like, how am I going to be the father of a great nation if I don't have any descendants? And
That's a
they
problem.
try to figure that out on their own steam. And so one of the things they came up with, you know how in the modern world, if a couple can't get pregnant, they sometimes will get a surrogate mother instead of adoption, and they'll use artificial insemination and so forth, and they'll have this woman carry a baby to term, and it's all agreed ahead of time that the baby will stay with the couple, and it's kind of an alternative way of adopting.
Right.
Well, they had, you know, women not being able to get pregnant is not a new problem.
Right.
Sarah couldn't get pregnant. And oh, by the way, my wife's a nurse. She always tells me it's usually the guys who got the medical problem, not the women.
Right.
But Abraham and Sarah were trying to figure out, how do we get pregnant? And so they took a slave girl named Hagar. She was an Egyptian. And Abraham got her pregnant, and she had a son. And his name was Ishmael. And Ishmael grew up, but he was not to be the heir when Sarah got pregnant and had Isaac. Sarah kicked Hagar and Ishmael out of camp, and they were sent off into the desert, and God rescued them and promised that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation as well. And when you trace his descendants, it's all the rest of the Semitic people, the Arabs and so forth. So this Arab-Israeli fight that we have going on in the news all the time if you follow the history all the way back, you end up with Abraham as the father of both people, and Ishmael is the oldest son and by Semitic law should have inherited, and then Isaac is the son by the wife and inherits, and so this whole thing is a big family squabble between cousins. So anyway,
Interesting.
that story starts at Genesis 12, and it goes, and the son Isaac ends up, when his dad dies, becoming the head of the family, and then he has sons. You have Isaac, Jacob is the son, and then Jacob has, let me get it to the right place in the book. There's some interesting family things. One of the marriage customs, if you're thinking about how did they get married in those days, Abraham sent a servant back to his family and said, get a wife for my son.
Wife for his son.
He
Just go.
travels,
Just go pick somebody?
yeah, somebody from the family. So the servant goes back to the family, and then when he arrives, he's just coming in out of the desert, and this girl comes up and says, do you want me to water your animals for you? Because she's got this bucket on a long rope that goes down a well, and he's really impressed with her and follows her home, and it turns out that her dad is Abraham's brother-in-law. And so he offers the marriage contract to Rebecca, and she takes it and goes off to a country to meet an uncle she's never seen, to marry a cousin that she's never seen. And
I don't think that would fly today.
That's awesome.
Like married at first sight.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in India today, they still have the custom of arranged marriages.
Yeah.
And there are marriage brokers that negotiate contracts and so forth. And when I was on the India Bible literature, all the Indian guys met their wives at the wedding.
Oh,
They,
How weird.
yeah, I mean, in Velu's case, he never even saw the girl at a distance until she was presented to him at the wedding. And
Isn't
The-
that awkward for them?
yeah, I heard an Indian comedian talking about the American political process, and he said this picking of presidential candidates is kind of like an arranged marriage where you have somebody you have no idea who they are picked for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
He said in America they
Yeah.
call that politics, and in India we call it a wedding.
that's crazy.
That's
And the idea is that
Cover that up.
it's a job, and the broker's supposed to find somebody that's
I feel like it
qualified,
would have been easier if
and if you guys fall in love later on, so much the better.
Qualified
just using the.
Well, like,
to what?
To run the household, to, cook, clean, have the children, that kind of thing.
But to whose standards? The husband's standards or like his family standards?
Well, it's kind of a adaptation of cultural
You don't see the
expectation.
bottom.
Like,
Yeah, but
women
right
do this,
Oh,
and so this woman
Need to
does
cover
that
everything.
in this place with these people.
oh, okay.
Now, it's not without problems.
creative
In
and
India, there's about
change it
400 or
up.
500 bride burnings, which is
You put the name?
after the wedding, the groom's family will go back and want more money for the dowry. If they don't pay up, unfortunately, there's some girls that have kitchen accidents and don't survive. Accidents in quote. Not very common at all, but it happens every once in a while. And it was in the news one time when I was in India, and it, generated a lot of conversation.
Wow.
People will lie. One guy that I talked to, the girl was, she had mental health issues, and the family didn't
Put that out.
Oh,
do that, and
Yeah.
they did meet ahead of time, and they had her medicated to hide it, and so forth, and then it came out at the last minute, and they didn't go forward with the wedding, and the bride's family sued them for breach of contract,
Oh, my.
and it got really ugly really quickly.
Oh.
He ended up winning the lawsuit because of the deception about the medical condition. So, it's a different way of doing things.
Right.
Just so you know, up until probably 100 years ago, you were most likely to marry your cousin.
Yeah.
that's all strange.
You still can.
You still can, but that was like 85, 90% of the weddings. So, and if you think everybody, most people were on farms up until then, and it was like keeping the farmland in the family and things like that. So, if you really branched out far, you might marry somebody that's in the youth group with you.
I don't know about
That's
that.
far.
So,
Although that happened with Kyle and Jackie.
Yeah. It did.
so anyways, Abraham and Sarah, it's a great story, very much worth reading. Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have a set of twins. Not Ishmael, Esau and Jacob. And they're not identical, they're fraternal,
In like the middle.
but
No, yeah, but it should be, the words need to be facing the exact same way, or else it'll look stupid.
Esau was a real sport-oriented kind of guy, a hunter, and he had a very ruddy complexion and was very hairy. And his younger brother was kind of a mama's boy, liked to hang out in the camp and so forth. And as siblings would go, the one brother Esau came in from hunting, and he was ravishingly hungry. And he goes up to his brother, who is sitting there making porridge, a little cauldron over a fire, and he goes, "Hey, brother, give me some of that to eat." And Jacob says, "Well, I'll trade you some of this porridge for your birthright as the firstborn."
No, wait, food for your birthright?
Yes. And Esau took him up on it. And I forgot to tell you, when they were born, Jacob came out of the womb second, but he'd gotten his hand onto his brother's foot. So when they delivered the twins, Esau comes out first, makes him the firstborn, and right behind him comes Jacob, and he's holding on to his brother's foot. So the name Jacob means he who grasps, as in grasp his brother's foot.
Wow.
Oh my God.
So this kind of rivalry thing over the birthright, when Dad was dying,
Oh.
Dad sent Esau out to get some game and make his favorite stew. So Esau left to go hunting, and while he was gone, Mom took Jacob, and they put fur on his arm so that if his dad grabbed it, he'd feel the hairy arm that Jacob didn't have, but Esau did. And they made him wear Esau's clothes. They didn't bathe or wash their clothing, they just wore it until it rotted off. So he smelled like his brother and
Felt like his
felt
brother.
like his brother and tried to talk like his brother, and went in there and said, "Dad, give me your blessing." Blessing's a big deal in the old days. And so Isaac's kind of like not buying it, but he ends up blessing who he thinks is Esau, and it turns out that it's Jacob. So Jacob not only bought the birthright for a mess of porridge, as it says in the King James Bible, but he also stole the blessing from the dad by deception. So Esau comes back and figures out what happened, and everybody's kind of, oh, this isn't good. And Esau leans over to his brother and he goes, as soon as Dad's dead, you're next.
Yeah, I wonder if these kids remember acting that out in Sunday school. Putting fur on, remember, and putting blindfolds on and figuring out, doing the Esau thing, and you don't remember that? Do you remember that?
Not at all.
Because I
I wanna
remember I
say,
pulled
yeah.
fur out, I don't remember which kid had fur on him.
I want to say yes, but not for sure.
So these kinds
Sorry.
of stories talk about human relationships and so forth, and kind of encouraging that, you know, your family doesn't have to be perfect, because
That's good.
Abraham's
Yeah,
wasn't.
that's really good.
And so if you were Jacob and your hunter-killer brother just threatened you, what would you do?
Punch her in the face.
Do what?
You do what?
Punch him in the face.
Oh,
Lila.
Well, that's
If he said, "Oh, I'm gonna kill you," I'm like, "Go ahead, try."
well, apparently Jacob didn't do that because he was pretty convinced that his brother was going to kill him.
Okay, so he was.
So-
But if it's an older brother, then you're like, "Oh."
Yeah, I mean,
But, like,
this
I'm the
guy,
older sibling.
If it
so
was
go ahead,
Morgan,
try.
I would laugh in her face.
this guy is like a bona fide killer kind of guy.
Oh
So
my god, I missed
Mom and Jacob figure out, I think it's time for you to go visit my brother, your Uncle Laban. And so he is packed off by Mom and heads up through the Lebanon, going back up into what's now Syria to visit family, to get away from his brother. And on the way, he gets to a certain place, and just make a long story short, this certain place is Jerusalem. And at Jerusalem, there is, just outside of the oldest part of the city, this bare rock with a cave in it that some guy was using as a threshing floor. And that is where Abraham had tried to sacrifice Isaac. If you remember that story. It's where Jacob has his dream of a ladder going up to heaven.
Yeah.
Some people even believe that it's where Adam died. But that threshing floor becomes really central in everything. So Jacob goes to Uncle Laban, and he comes out of the desert, and he meets this young female named Rachel, and he is smitten, falls head over heels in love with her, and wants to marry his cousin. And the uncle says, well, you need to work for me for 7 years to earn this privilege.
7.
7
marry her?
years to marry her. So he does. Now, Rebecca has
No. Bless you.
Rebecca has a
Bless you.
sister named Leah. And I
Princess
always
Leia?
remember this.
That's what it is. Princess Leia.
Leah, the joke is that she doesn't look so good. She actually didn't see very well,
She liked the evil stuff.
and that's in the scripture. So anyway, he works for 7 years, and God blesses his endeavor.
Can you hear me? The glue.
And at the wedding, now keep in mind, Semitic weddings lasted a week.
That sounds fun.
That's too
And
bad,
there was lots of wine and dancing
I
and
hope you brought another
games
pair
and
of shoes.
feasting and all that kind of stuff. And at the final night, they have the big banquet, and then the bride and the groom go off to the bridal chamber and so
Oh.
forth. And there's kind of a ceremonial carrying the girl off, and the guy follows, and you know, all this good stuff. And so Jacob goes in, and in the morning he finds out that his father-in-law, Uncle Laban, had switched the girls. It wasn't Rachel, it was Leah.
Why did he switch the girls?
Because he knew he'd never marry her off.
Okay,
Wait, but how, wait, he didn't see her?
because of the,
Well, it's dark
the
and they've been
appearance.
drinking for a week.
Oh,
So-
oh, okay.
And as
See.
Ben Franklin said, all cats are gray at night. So, he's a little annoyed with his father-in-law slash uncle slash boss, and he goes and says, hey, yeah, it looks good. Very good. You're a crafty person.
yeah.
So he goes in to his father-in-law, and they negotiate a deal that he can marry Rachel right away, another week of wedding, but he has to work for Uncle Laban for another 7 years. So he does.
Okay.
And at the end of the 7 years, he's getting kind of tired of putting all of his effort into making Uncle Laban rich. So he takes his wives and all of his property and all this kind of stuff, and he leaves. He's going back home. So he has to be really unhappy at Uncle Laban's to carry all that people and animals and stuff to go back to his older brother Esau, who, when the last time they met, Esau was like, I'm going to kill you. So they get there,
That's disturbing.
and Jacob is scheming about how to meet up with his brother, and so he sends his whole entourage in stages over the river into his brother's territory, and he's going to come last, and he's sending gifts ahead to his brother, and he's got his servants delivering these flattering speeches and all this other kind of stuff. And the night before, everybody else has crossed the river, and they're moving toward Esau, and Jacob's the last guy on the north side of the river, and he's about to cross, and an individual known as the angel of the Lord grabs a hold of him, and they get into this wrestling match that goes all night long. And at sunrise the next morning, the angel of the Lord goes, hey, this is really fun, but I got to go. And he smites
This is.
Jacob on the hip, and
Oh, yeah, I
he's
remember that.
permanently crippled by it.
I do remember that story.
And then the angel goes, oh, by the way, in case you don't know who I am, I'm changing your name to He Who Wrestles with God, Israel.
That's right.
So he crosses over, he's reconciled with his brother, and the story then moves on to
I crossed
his
them all.
children. This is all in Genesis, so you really want to read this book. It's just like this fun story.
The ones that I glued on.
The children of Jacob, now called Israel, so we talk about the children of Israel. He has, count this, Leah, and her maid is his concubine, which is like a second-class wife. He has Rachel and her concubine. I think they're like Hula and Bethula or whatever. So he's got the equivalent of 4 wives, and he has children with all of them.
Wow.
So he ends up with 10 sons.
That's it?
Isn't that bad?
I mean, that's a lot.
I have one
Women.
wife and 3 sons and a daughter, you know, so we didn't
Yeah.
count the daughters, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
They're in
They
there
count the
too.
daughters.
Yeah, you don't-
So, Rachel only has 2 kids. One of them named Joseph, and the other one named Benjamin. And then Rachel dies delivering Benjamin.
Oh.
So for Israel, he's got all these sons like Simeon and Dan and so forth. But these 2 from Rachel are kind of his favorites.
Oh.
And one of them is just, he's so much younger than everybody else that he kind of scoots along. But the son, Joseph, was a jerk. That's a technical theological term. Joseph,
We can relate to that.
Dad keeps him in camp, kind of like he did, and he treats him better than the others. So like 8 of the boys are out watching the flocks all summer long. Now, keep in mind, this is a semi-arid desert, and there's very little water, and it can get
Dry.
like kill you kind of hot. And they're out there all summer long watching sheep eat. Kind of boring.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, their youngest brother, Joseph, or second to the youngest, is back in the camp. And he's getting meals prepared for him, and Dad's buying him fancy clothing, like the Bible says a coat with sleeves, and somehow in English that turned into a multicolored coat. The other guys don't get
I
that.
don't think I did. I don't think I knew that little
You gotta
tidbit.
learn a little
What's
Hebrew.
so special about a coat with sleeves?
Only rich people had them.
Why? Because that's the fabric?
The sewing, that was,
Yeah.
you know,
You're rich,
That makes
makes
sense.
clothing all the way up
You're
through the
rich.
colonial period in the United States
I
was,
am.
you know, like Hans Herr, the first white guy in
You're
Lancaster
rich.
County, has this
This is gray.
10-foot wide hand-carved
Yeah,
hardwood
sleeves.
cabinet to hang his clothes in, and in his will, he has an inventory of what's in the closet and doesn't mention the trunk, because that's just wood.
Everyone here is rich.
The cloth was
Oh, wow.
animals and
Yeah.
shearing and spinning and weaving, and
Oh.
you know, the labor that went into clothing made it extraordinarily
I think of that.
expensive. But anyway, Joseph used to go to his brothers and say, you know, I had a dream last night that we were all out working in the field like he ever did, and we were cutting sheaths of wheat and tying them into bundles, and all of y'all's sheaths bowed down and worshiped mine. What do you think that means? Or, you know, these stars, and each of us had a star, and yours fell from the sky and worshiped mine. What do you think this meant? And his brothers are thinking, it means we're going to kill you. So
You're crazy.
one day, Dad sends Joseph out to supervise his older brothers to make sure that they're doing a good job watching the sheep eat and so forth, and they see him coming. And it's got to be like August, and they're just not in a good mood about anything, and here comes the brat. And they decide, here's our chance. And they're about ready to, you know, they beat him up, and they're about ready to kill him, and one of the brothers goes, no, 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 no. It's a sin to kill anybody, but it's a real sin to kill your own brother. So, you know, why don't we just throw him in this cistern? It's like a hole in the ground that you store water in, and we'll figure out what to do. And the one brother was thinking, well, they'll calm down, and in the morning we'll be all right. But in the morning, this group of people who were descended from Ishmael, and they call them Ishmaelites, are in a caravan, and they're going from what's modern-day Israel across the Negev down into Egypt to trade. And so the brothers sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites and get money for him, and they take his fancy coat and they dip it in the blood of an animal, and they take it home to their dad, and they go, boo-hoo, Joseph got eaten by wild beasts, and this is all we found of
This
him.
is what's left.
This is what's left of
Oh, that's not
our
even-
brother, your son.
Boo-hoo.
And you're
And so Dad is, you know, Israel's like devastated because he loved this boy. And he thinks he's gone, and he hangs on to the other brother, Benjamin, really tightly. Because Benjamin's all he's got left of Rachel and so forth. Well, when Joseph gets down into Egypt, he is sold to a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar's job was he ran the farms that were Pharaoh's personal property. So, for example, if you go to England today, every ship in the Navy, Her Majesty's ship and Her Majesty's government, and this belongs to the crown and that belongs to the crown, and all of that is actually the property of the federal government. But Elizabeth Mountbatten, that's her name, who happens to be the queen, owns stuff in her own right that has nothing to do with the government. And she, oh, by the way, is the richest woman in the world and maybe the richest person in the world.
Yeah, I can.
But Potiphar's job was to run Pharaoh's farms. So he's a very powerful guy. And he bought Joseph as a field hand. So in shackles, dragged out there, and pull weeds in the sun, brother. It's your new life.
That's what you have to do.
But Joseph could
Only this one.
do arithmetic,
And that one.
Oh,
and that came out. So instead of, you got this guy that can
Doesn't have to.
work with numbers, pulling weeds, you can get better out of him if you put him working with numbers.
right.
So Joseph starts moving up the ranks of the slaves, and he ends up becoming Potiphar's #1 administrative assistant. He runs everything for Potiphar. And that goes on for a while, and what Joseph has done is he's learned, like 90% of the ancient economy was agriculture. He's learned Egyptian agriculture. He's learned to speak Egyptian language. He's got this network of people. He knows how the money flows and so forth.
It went pretty well for him.
It was going good for him.
Yeah.
And he is, my Israeli friends were, of course he was handsome. He was an Israeli, and olive skin, dark hair, ripped because he's done a lot of manual labor, eats well, all that kind of stuff. And Potiphar's wife
Yes.
thinks he's pretty cute.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry, it's after 12. She has to go.
Oh,
I didn't know-
upset Spike.
I know. Yeah.
All right, have fun.
You did good finding
Do
books.
good.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day, hon.
So-
We have our thing.
So
Yeah.
Potiphar's wife gets the hots for Joseph. And she tries to lure him into infidelity. And he won't do it. She keeps trying. And finally, they're in the house and it's just the two of them. And she tries again and he runs off and she grabs his coat and he leaves it behind and she screams rape and uses the coat as evidence. So Joseph is immediately arrested, thrown in the Husgau, and the Husgau is the jail that all of Pharaoh's prisoners were in.
Wow.
And kind of like the end of the story for Joseph, except he can read and write and manage and do all this kind of stuff. And the jailer realizes it's more better if, that's a technical English
More
term.
better.
It's better if I use Joseph to help me run the jail.
Right.
And so Joseph moves his way up among these political prisoners, and he's managing the jail on behalf of Pharaoh's jailer and so forth. And then a couple of guys come in as prisoners who, one or the other of them, has stolen an expensive chalice of Pharaoh's. And they're locked up while they sort out who did it. And these two guys are obviously scared because just about every crime in those days was a death penalty. And so they have bad dreams. And then they find out that, well, this guy Joseph, he can interpret dreams. So they both tell him their dreams. And he says to the one guy, you stole the chalice, you're going to die. And the other one, he says, you didn't steal the chalice and you're going to live and be restored to your position. That's what your dream means. And so that happens. And Joseph continues to languish in the jail until a while later, I can't remember if the Bible actually says how long, Pharaoh starts having bad dreams. And finally, the guy that had his dream interpreted by Joseph, says, you know, boss, there's this guy in your jail, blah, 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 blah. And so they clean him up, drag him up, throw him on the ground in front of Pharaoh and tell him, interpret his dream. And what Pharaoh had dreamed was there were these really nasty looking cows come up out of the Nile River and eat all of the grain. And, you know, what's this mean? And Joseph, of course, can interpret dreams because he prays and God gives him the answers. And so he prays and he said, this is what your dream means. It means there's a famine coming.
I knew it. I literally
All right?
knew it.
So you've heard these stories.
Yes.
Well, the Pharaoh ends up putting Joseph in charge of the famine project.
Is that,
So they get
is that
7
what you
years of good
want?
harvest,
Is that what you want?
and then they get the famine hits. And what Joseph does is stockpile all the grain he possibly can with the bumper crops, and then when the famine hits, Pharaoh is sitting in control of all this food. And there is a period of time in Egyptian history about here where Pharaoh ends up going from kind of like the chief of the aristocrats to literally God on earth and owns everything. And they think it was connected with this famine that Pharaoh came out on top. But the famine hit the whole region, and so after a while, people started traveling to Egypt to buy grain. And one of the groups that came down out of the Middle East, up in what we call Canaan or Palestine, it's the land of Israel, were his brothers. And of course, he's now looking like an Egyptian, he's all powerful, and so forth, and they don't recognize him. They think he's dead. It's been years. And he recognizes them right away. And so in Genesis, it lays out this, he wines them and dines them and then sends them back, and their price that they paid for the grain is in their bags, and they have to come back again, and then he arrests one of them and makes him go get his father and little brother, and they're finally reconciled. And there's a great line in there about Dad died, and the brothers are like, oh, we're in for it now, because he was just being nice to us because Dad was still alive, and now we're like up the Nile without a paddle. And they go to him, and I don't know if Dad actually said it or not, but they say Dad said to be nice to us, and Joseph is weeping, and he's hugging his brothers, and he said, this wonderful line, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good. And that kind of ends the story of Joseph. He eventually dies, and that's the book of Genesis, this family story.
That's amazing.
It's really fun to read.
So
And these
I
stories have rolling
How many of those do
implications.
you have?
I think
We have
on the
4.
book of Genesis, write down a few things that we heard Pastor talking about today, and we do have to.
Are you gonna do the tape
Um,
on all of it?
It doesn't matter, but we do need to
You have.
pray ourselves out today because we're past our
We're at our
past our
time.
time, and it goes fast when you're doing things.
Man, these books are looking good.
I know
Aren't
they
they?
are. They're looking. It's going to be really cool when
I'm
they're.
not sure the people on camera have seen them.
Oh, hold up the stack.
Show our library off.
We got it started. There's that,
See?
and we've got some
We
started
have some
over
red
here.
ones.
Yeah,
Got some red ones.
got some red ones for
There's the
Torah.
Genesis.
You have
Yep.
Exodus going on?
Well, they're working on it.
We got
I was
Exodus.
just
We'll get to
checking
it.
them off.
Oh, well, I only
I like
printed.
to stay organized, that's why I wanted to color it.
Okay. Well, let's. Who's going to pray us out today?
Aiden.
No pressure.
Don't blow it.
Dear Lord, thank you for this day. thank you for helping us remember All Saints Day. And thanks for, oh geez, I'm not good at this. Thanks for bringing us all here today to learn about the Bible and to get a better understanding of who you were and what you did. Amen.
Amen.
Yay, good job.
All right,
Good one.
we'll see you next
More
time.
fun in person.
It is more fun in person.